So in many ways, the prequel really was, I think, the ideal way to approach the adaptation. The games have certain archetypes of characters. You know, they quite often focus on very, very strong female characters, young female characters. And that's why the movie focuses on Milla and Michelle Rodriguez, you know, and they are playing archetypes from the game, there's no doubt about that. Milla's not called Jill Valentine, but in her mind and in my mind, that's what she was playing. She was absolutely playing that kind of character. Also, the structure of the game is interesting, that when you enter a new room, you cut to a black screen and a set of doors open. And as you're playing, there's that moment of like anticipation, because you have no idea what's going to be in that room, whether it's going to be a load of undead that attack you, whether it's going to be something that's going to help you. And it's really very suspenseful. One of the things we did was we structured the movie. If you go back and watch the film again, there's a hell of a lot of doors opening in this film. The Red Queen's an entirely new character that's just created for the movie.
You're all going to die down here.
What happens in the game is you get told a lot of the story as you go through the game by reading journals that you find lying around. So there's a lot of reading in the game. You know, you're like reading books, reading reports, typing computer screens, reading the computer screen, and that can make for incredibly dull cinema. So we had to find a different way to convey a lot of the narrative. So I came up with the idea that we should have a computer, but one that could talk.
The T-virus was a major medical breakthrough, although it clearly also possessed highly profitable military applications.
The movie is shot a little like the video game. There are these great down angles where you look into rooms, look down on top of people. And, you know, whenever I had a chance to do a shot like that, we'd do it. And that's an angle that is straight out of the video game. I mean, that's an angle that's very familiar to any kind of gamer. So in many ways, you know, the feel of the game was put into the movie. The only one consistent creature that's been in every single one of the games are the zombie dogs. When people discovered I was making the movie, fans would always be the first question they ask. Are the dogs in the film? Are the dogs in the film? So it became obvious the dogs had to be in the film. It takes a lot from a whole genre of movies which I'm a huge fan of, which are the Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, that trilogy that Romero did. And not only those, but also the Lucio Fulci movies. That's what attracted me to the game, was not only is it a very strong game, to make a movie out of it was a chance to reinvent a movie genre that just hadn't been done for 20 years.
The first zombie movies came around, you know, they were the voodoo zombie kind of films from the early 30s. I Walked with a Zombie, White Zombie, and old movies like that. And in the original zombie movies, it wasn't so much you had to kill the zombies, it was you have to kill whoever is in charge of the zombies. And back in the day, it was the zombies were very mindless, and they weren't eating people, they weren't doing any of that. They were just, you know, they'd go and strangle. It was like having an army of mummies, but you only ever had like 8 people. The idea behind Night of the Living Dead was these people aren't like vampires. They're not going to suck your blood. They're going to eat your flesh. They are going to actually tear into your flesh and like eat the musculature and stuff like that. This was totally new, and it was sick, and it was considered completely demented.
The rules of Romero's movies, you know, were picked up very much by the video game. So we were sticking true to the rules of the video game. The universe of the video game is, you know, it's very explicit. You know, there are certain rules, there are certain things you have to obey. You can't have fast-moving zombies, for example. You know, they've got to move at a certain pace. We were actually staying true to the rules that were set up in the video game rather than Romero's movies, although the video game was obviously heavily influenced by his films.
While the story of the movie doesn't exactly follow the story of any particular game, like the first Night of the Living Dead, the first game is kind of claustrophobic. It's kind of like you fighting terror alone. And the second game, like the second Night of the Living Dead movie, Dawn of the Dead, is sort of more post-apocalyptic, and now you're dealing with kind of a world where everything has broken down.
When I became involved in the movie, I made it very clear that I wanted to make an R-rated film. I mean, there was never any question of that in my mind, because I think to be true to the video game, there was no way you could make this into a PG-13 movie.
Bitch isn't standing now.
And I knew it would become a battle at some point, because PG-13 movies can play to a broader audience and can make more money. So at some point, you always get the question, can't we make this a PG-13? For us to have made a PG-13 Resident Evil, fans would have hated us. And I would have hated us as well, because that wouldn't have been Resident Evil. We couldn't have stayed true to the source material.
Politicians and people who have particular social agendas tend to blame whatever is popular at the time for whatever social problem seems intractable at the time. In the 50s, it was comic books. 60s and 70s, it was television. And in the 80s, it was violent films, and now it's video games.
I think it's kind of absurd to try and look at a movie like Resident Evil and say, all these guys shooting guns at zombies, which is a fantasy, is gonna affect our kids. But George Bush is blowing up another country right now, and that's not gonna affect the kids.
Video games have changed the language of films the way that other visual media have. Computers have allowed creative people to fulfill their wildest dreams and visions, and video games are one of those things. I think films have evolved and are continually evolving depending on the times.